Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again. I'm going to talk now about Stargirl, and this will be a season finale review of the 13th episode, Stars and Stripe Part 2. And I will warn you straight away that there will be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, I advise you to stop watching now, go back, catch up with the episode, and then come back to this review, because I will be going in depth into what happened within this episode. Also, if you like the content on my channel, please hit those subscribe and like buttons and help me grow this channel as I progress and continue to provide you with quality content throughout. Now, back to this review. Now, overall, this was an action-packed conclusion to the first season. It was spectacular, it was epic, it was everything that you would normally want and expect from a season finale. There were some elements that were a bit rushed. Some of the story and some of the narrative was a bit brushed over, a bit rushed, a bit flawed, but overall this was a satisfactory end to the series. So I will be going now into more depth as what I think worked, what I didn't think worked as well. So you've been warned finally, so here we go. So the original setup was we had from last week, the previous episode, Stars and Stripe Part 1, where we saw the ISA and the Project America coming into fruition now. Brainwave had that kind of Cerebro device, as I mentioned from last episode, where he was controlling now all the adults within America, and we realised that only the young people were immune, if you like, to this control. And we had that cliffhanger where we saw Pat in the Stripe robot being put under the control of Brainwave, attacking Courtney. So we began this episode where we had the opening scene where we had the fiddler, the son of the principal of the show. Basically, he assaulted someone with his instrument, because this was a reference to the previous episode where his mother had told him the backstory of his father, who also was playing with the tuba and he was getting bullied on, and she told him that he drove the tuba through that person's face. So this is the son reenacting what his father did before him. So this is just a quick setup for season 2, where we're going to see the fiddler be the new villain, or one of the new villains throughout the season. And again, as I mentioned in the previous episode, we're going to see a lot where we see a much more of a younger incarnation of the Injustice Society take on the much younger incarnation of the Justice Society. So this was a setup here, and as we went through this scene, we saw the big satellite emerge from the football stadium, Project America fully in place now, and we see all the adults in a state of paralysis and under control over the Project America setup. And then we picked up from that cliffhanger from last episode where Pat attacks Courtney under Brainwave's control. We see that Beth and Chuck have to work together to try and disarm the control, and they do this by distracting the gambler who's activating all of the systems, and they hack into his financial accounts. So obviously the gambler is very concerned about all his money being farmed away to all these charities that they were reenacting all these funds to. So that distracted him enough. They were able then to disarm the signal boosters for Pat, and this is what disarmed his control under Brainwave. And then we had the big face-off between the Justice Society and the Injustice Society, and this resulted in an amazing battle, spectacular fight set pieces. It was very reminiscent of the premiere episode. If you remember, when we had that massive opening in that mansion between the original Justice Society and the ISA, really full blown out, great effects. I loved all the stunt work, and we saw all the characters as they were somersaulting and pirouetting. This is really comic book imagination fully realised. I love all these group battles, great effects alike on it. Sometimes the scenery can get a bit dark, and they do this just to hide some of the effects maybe, but in general this is all fantastic. And we see Stargirl and Hellcat and Icicle and all the others just really fighting off against each other, Sportsmaster, Tigress. This is all great throughout on here. Now, I did have one big issue with this battle, as spectacular as it was, and that was to me that the Justice Society were kind of winning a bit too easily. The ISA have been really a formidable force throughout the whole season. We saw in the previous episode, we saw Sportsmaster and Tigress in a physical confrontation, the one-on-one, they were superior, right? So they were building these villains throughout the whole season as a force to be reckoned with. So when we get a final battle, yes, I'd expect the Justice Society to have some sort of physical fight back against them. They have been training, yes, so we've had a good development with them as a team, and they're preparing, and they've been assessing who's capable of what, and we've had a good time to see them working together. So that's all fine, but I just felt that they were just gaining the upper hand a bit too quickly. I don't think they should have been able to beat down the ISA so comfortably and so easily, and this was really emphasised in a couple of moments that we got on it. One of which was that we saw that Shiv, or Cindy, had managed to escape from her cell that she was in, and she just comes up behind the Dragon King and just stabs him, just like that, very easily. Now, I know that she didn't like him because he had imprisoned her and he didn't deem her worthy enough to join the ISA, but to take that drastic step to kill him and to do it in just such a nonchalant way, it just felt very cheap. To just have him just be beaten like that, it just felt a bit cheap and a bit too easily. So we continue with the battle, and now we see Solomon Grundy finally emerge from this cell. They've been building this up, of course, because as we know from the previous stories that Solomon Grundy was responsible for the murder of Rick's parents. This was a very ambitious effect because for a television show, of course, someone like Solomon Grundy, he's very much of a Hulk-sized character, so it's straining on a television show's budget to have a character like this, a fully CGI immersive character involved in all these fight scenes. Now, in the beginning, the effects look quite good. When he's fighting S.T.R.I.P.E, the robot S.T.R.I.P.E, it looks quite good in motion, very well. But when he started fighting Rick, that's when he could sort of see a bit more that the effects looked a bit dodgy, he looked a bit too rubbery, and sometimes he actually looked a bit out of proportion, like his head was a lot more smaller to what his body was. And yeah, the fight sequences and the fight choreography here wasn't as convincing. Whenever you got a close-up of his face, yeah, it just took you out of it a bit. Now, I understand, again, this is a television show and he won't have the same budget of a Game of Thrones, if you like, so I do understand you're going to see a bit of flaws and a bit of imperfections. It was just a bit jarring just to see these kind of imperfections and improportions of the character as he was involved in these fight scenes. So we saw Yolandi and she took on the other disciples in a corridor. We had a great twist here. We saw that Henry Jr. had emerged, and when we saw this we thought, okay, he's been quite a prominent character throughout. Again, they may want to save this character for season 2, so I was convinced that yeah, he's actually there. And he explained to Yolandi that he had been hidden amongst the disciples for a couple of days because he was trying to find out what his father was up to. So that was a convincing setup, and you think, right, okay, he's going to come back and work together with the JSA. But then he quotes a line, "Where are your friends?" And then that makes Hellcat realise, well, they were actually your friends too. And then she realises that this isn't actually Henry Jr. And then she slashes his throat. And then we see that it's actually Brainwave who was morphed as his son. This was a much more convincing kill, I suppose, because she slashed his throat. But again, Brainwave has been really the most powerful and most formidable foe throughout this whole series. So to have him just beaten in such a quick, instantly free moment. Well, if Brainwave can control all the adults, why did he go down the corridor himself? Why didn't he just influence the adults the same way he influenced Pat and just send a couple of them down there to take down the JSA or distract them? Icicle realise now that they're really losing the upper hand, and the gambler tells him that Beth, along with Chuck, is controlling all the devices, and it was only a matter of time before she manages to disarm the influence of Project America. So he goes to the office, sees Beth, who is there with Barbara, who's under control. He looks to take out Beth. Again, this is a bit convenient because we've seen in previous episodes Icicle, he's very ruthless and remorseless when he wants to take out someone. He'll normally take them out in one maneuver, so you kind of think to yourself, remember, Bev has no fighting skill, she has no armor, the Chuck system has no kind of weaponry attached to it, so really he could have taken Beth out straight away, but no, he just throws her against the wall and he takes Barbara away amongst the rooftop. He disarms, of course, and destroys the Dr. Midnight device. But I'm not really shocked by this development because I think they'll find some way in season 2 to revive this system. So we continue with the battle and we go back to Rick and Grundy fighting. As I mentioned before, the effects weren't quite as convincing on here. Rick in a brutal battle, and we see him impacting all these blows on Grundy, and he comes to the point where he picks up the rock and wants to strike the telling blow, but he refrains from doing so in the end. Now, he tried to excuse it, saying his hour was up in terms of his powers, but no, this was good. And again, Grundy kind of goes away. Now, I didn't mind this because Grundy is really a mindless brute. He's not someone who's really of his own devices, so he'll just walk away. They can bring him back maybe for one episode if they need to in season 2, but I think the whole arc with Grundy is kind of done now. You know, Rick chose not to kill him, so there's no reason to bring back Grundy for season 2, where we see Icicle. He takes Barbara to the rooftop. Again, I wasn't sure why he did this, but we get this big old speech again about how he wants to help society. He's trying to help the country become a better place, and that's always good for development for the villain, where they try to explain their own motivations and their own actions. He goes to throw Barbara off the rooftop when he states he's going to kill her and Courtney and Pat, but then Pat shows up and he goes to fight Icicle. Courtney comes in at this point and helps him out, and we get a much better effects here where we see Icicle and Stargirl fighting together, and Icicle gets the better hand of Stargirl, throws her off the ceiling. Hellcat comes in and saves her. Now, again, this is where we had a few issues with the pacing. Things just rattling on at such a spectacular pace. You could question a bit, how are these characters get into these places in such a quick time, but I didn't mind that too much. Everything was just heightened this much more for a dramatic effect, so I didn't mind that too much. So again, we come to the initial problem that I've mentioned before, is that Icicle gets on the ground and it seems he's going to face off against the others, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Mike just runs him over as he's coming into his Icicle form and just smashes him to pieces. And again, it just feels a cheap win, a cheap kill, a cheap way. Like, where the hell was Mike? He just come out of nowhere. He just thought all of a sudden he's going to get in the van and start driving towards the battle. What did he think he was going to do when he reached the battle? He just comes out of nowhere and just drives him over and kills him. Icicle, one of the most outstanding villains of the series, one of the most powerful villains of the series. You really think it's going to take a big effort to take him out, and then Mike just comes in and runs him over, and that's it. Just eyes shatters to the floor, and that's it, finished. Now, again, they could bring him back for season 2. Maybe there's some way that he's able to reform himself, reconstruct his body, so we wait and see what happens there. But again, it was just such a cheap, easy defeat for one of the most strongest villains of the show. We see now where Stargirl flies up and she takes out the massive satellite, disarming the Project America. That was good effects on here, and we see her and Hellcat running out of the building, and basically that's the Project America dissolved. What I say is pretty much destroyed at this point. We see the gambler delete all the files and run away. I'm not sure what is particularly what happened to Sportsmaster and Tigress. If anyone can tell me in the comments, they must have got away in the long run. But that's it. Basically, Project America is dismantled. Everybody's under the influence. That's now taken away. All the parents we see are reuniting with their children, and yes, the heroes win, and everything is kind of all wrapped up on here. As we've seen, the heroes group together, come together. We get very touching farewells and reunions with the various characters. On here we see the Knight character as he's going to go away now and try and rediscover himself. I like that scene as well. That was a very good touching farewell on here. We then come to the ending scenes where we see the character known as Shade. Now, if you know your DC Comics or your animation shows, particularly from Justice League Unlimited, this is a very famous super villain. He's able to kind of morph himself into a very dark smoke. So we see him in the offices of the ISA, and he's looking at the footage where he sees that all the events were massively covered up as an earthquake, and he seemingly is going to be the villain going ahead for season 2. We see Shiv or Cindy going into the warehouse, if you like, and she uncovers what I think is a diamond, and is it a Calypso or Eclipso? Now, I'm not fully aware of the DC mythology in terms of what this diamond is, so let me know in the comments if you know what this is. But this is going to be something that's very significant going ahead for season 2, so that's fantastic overall. And again, we just get the final moments where we jump forward 6 weeks later, Christmas time, the family have a Christmas dinner together, and we have that very touching moment where Courtney gives Pat the mug, saying he's the world's greatest dad. They embrace together. We get that family reunified together. That's all great. So obviously now going forward for season 2, they're all going to be a much more of a unified team, very much like the Pierce family, what we see now for Black Lightning. Now, I remarked in a previous episode review, I think that is the best way forward, to have the family all involved, all part of the same team. It keeps them more prominent and involved in the storylines ahead going forward. So that was great. And then we had the final scene again where we see Courtney and the staff flying away in the very snow-laden Blue Valley, and we see later on Pat and the robot S.T.R.I.P.E flying along with her. And that was just a touching scene, because as we know that both Stargirl and the S.T.R.I.P.E robot, they are the two, if you like, most iconic characters of the Stargirl universe, the Stargirl representation, right? So that was a good final capping off to see them just flying through. Okay, you might argue maybe it was a bit cheesy, but I think overall it worked in terms of the tone and the overall consistent direction of the show. And a very sweet moment on here, just really underlined the relationship that they have between the two, and they see them flying off on here. So that was it in resultant of the episode, and we have the final end credits stinger, if you like. Again, I did mention that at the beginning of this episode this will be spoilers, where we see the original Starman show up at the end. So that asks lots of various questions going forward. He obviously didn't die. How didn't he die in the begin with? I've got a sneaky feeling that this isn't him. I think this is maybe some sort of doppelganger or clone. This might have been a contingency plan of the ISA if they somehow fell in their Project America, if they somehow get defeated by the JSA, then maybe they'll put this clone into activation, and it's a way to kind of infiltrate and get to Courtney that way. That's what I think this is in the long run on here. So that was overall really the main events going ahead for this episode. Again, as I mentioned at the start, I thought it was spectacular, it was action packed, it was very dramatic, it had a lot of very emotional beats, a lot of emotional moments on here. A lot of it made sense in the long run. Very exciting to watch, very intense. My main issue is that I just think the pacing was a bit off throughout some of the episodes. Some of the developments felt a bit rushed. As I mentioned already, the big villains were getting taken out a bit too easily. And I think it was one of those cases where you have a series, a season 1, where the showrunners are not convinced, or they're not sure whether they're going to get a season 2, right? So what they do, they give it a much more of a conclusive ending. They leave some dangling parts that could lead into the second season, as I mentioned already, with Courtney's father showing up and Shiv finding that element, and we see Shade showing up. So there are elements that we can see going forward for season 2, but in general they wrap everything up because they're not sure whether it's going to get picked up, right? They normally only get notified when they're halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the season. And I think this is very similar with Black Lightning, the first season, where again villains were seemingly beaten up very easily, and we got a very much of a nicely wrapped, tied up ending where we see the family together. So I think that maybe affected this in the long run. I kind of get the feeling that this maybe should have been 10-15 minutes longer, that we just needed more time to show that it was a much more of a greater effort to defeat the JSA. I also feel that if they knew that we were automatically going to get a season 2, what I think would have been a better cliffhanger is that we have the JSA seemingly defeated or seemingly failing in their battle against the ISA, and then you have a cliffhanger moment where you think someone's going to die, maybe Courtney's in immense danger, and then you leave it there, and that will give us a kind of big cliffhanger to leave us wanting to see what happens in season 2. So those are my thoughts on the Stargirl season finale episode in this review. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you think it was a spectacular and action-packed episode? Did you think it was one of the best finales that we've seen recently within the CW universe? Because as we know, Stargirl will be fully integrating onto the CW network for season 2. Action-packed, spectacular finale, a really satisfactory conclusion to what I think has really been a really strong series. First season of the show, really surprising because I was a bit skeptical whether Stargirl would work as a season, but no, it's really surprised me, and I think it's turned out to be much better than what I thought. I will do an overall season review as I do with all the other television shows on this channel, so look out for that very soon in the long run. So those are my thoughts on the season finale of Stargirl. Let me know what you think in the comments below. there will be other following reviews, and you can check out the playlist as well, where you see other reviews of other CW shows on this channel as well. So that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances. A really spectacular and action-packed conclusion to the season 1 of Stargirl. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.